I'm really honored to be able to speak at an AES event. It's called Using Binaural Head Recording Techniques and Related HD Video for Music Production. It's kind of a mouthful. I've been doing these kinds of things for about 11 years now. When I first started, it's like, that's nice. And now, as you can tell from this particular convention, there's more attention being paid to binaural, which is great, and I'm very happy about that. So let me get started here with a general outline of what I expect to talk about. Some of you have heard the headphone demo. I just want to make sure that everybody has their headphones on properly, left and right, and balance. And so that's getting started. Then I want to talk about the conflict between binaural and stereo productions, namely producing for headphones versus producing for loudspeakers. I'd like to make a creative observation, which I call the synergy between sight and sound. This has been known to psychology folks for a long time, and you'll see it's an important part of what I've been doing. I'd like to then talk about cognition and the concept of cognitive dissonance. That'll become clear when I get into that particular part. Then I like to talk about a production meme or an idea that I'd like you to have in your head as to why do this, what might it be all about, things of that nature. Then I want to talk something about the two advantages of binaural production, which is a timbral and a spatial fidelity advantage. And then we're going to get into some elements of the production process I've been using, the hardware, the nuts and bolts, the science behind it, and then we'll get into production examples. Everyone wants to hear things, so we'll try to move efficiently that way. And then, of course, we'll do a summary and conclusion. Okay, some of you have been through this, but I'd like to thank French Television for providing this very nice demo system, and Ultrasound for, they either sold them the earphones or they provided the earphones, but we have, I think, about 96 earphones here from what I can tell, and this was this is what the Hi-Fi or the HFI 580 looks like. I did manage to find a frequency response curve on a website that does measurements, and if you're not familiar with headphone measurements, this would be what some people call a raw or a drum reference, meaning that you put in a uniform voltage to either ear of the earphone, and then you measure the pressure at the eardrum. And that pretty much tells you the transfer characteristic. And for those of you that expect to see something flat, that's generally not what you want to do, because in real life you have an ear canal resonance that's always working that bumps you up some 10 to 15 dB at 3 kilohertz, and if you close off the system, that resonance isn't working, so you bring it back through the headphone design. And this headphone, I would say, does a pretty good job there. I will predict that it'll maybe sound a little crisp to some of you. And it will have a pleasant amount of bass balance, we hope. Okay, this is what the system looks like to my understanding. There's a master volume feed, and then there are 12 8-channel preamps or amplifiers hidden somewhere in the room, and you don't have individual control of your earphones, so hopefully we'll find a good compromise here. So for those of you that arrived a bit late, you could put your headphones on, and left should be left and right should be right, and you got to look at them kind of carefully to make sure you put them on the right way. So this is just a channel identification.
Left channel, left channel, left channel, right channel, right channel, right channel, left channel, left channel, left channel, right channel, right channel, right channel, left channel, left channel, left channel, right channel, right channel, right channel.
So I'd like to talk now about what I call the conflict between binaural and stereo production. You've got two elements to concern with, a spectral timbral and a spatial difference. In other words, if I'm producing two-channel production with loudspeakers, and then I listen on headphones, the spatial and the tonal are not necessarily going to be the same. And the opposite is true. If I produce for headphones, then when I listen with loudspeakers, that's not going to match. And if you've been experimenting in your own work producing these ways, you probably know what I'm talking about based on your own experience. Solving this conflict, I will talk about a little bit later, because I do believe that I have a solution to this problem where there would be one production and a way to satisfy both customers without having to remix the whole thing. Okay, hopefully that sounds exciting to you. All right, this is a creative observation that occurred to me quite a few years ago, and I call it the synergy of sight and sound, in that it improves cognition. So what do we mean by improving cognition? We're using two senses now. So here we have Mr. or Mrs. Normal Person that has full cognition. They have touch, sight, sound, smell, and taste all working. This is what collectively convinces all of you, you are here. You know, there's this, you're really here, right? So I cross out the question mark, you know where you are. But let's see what happens if we start to take away some of the senses. Now I'm leaving sight and sound because those are the ones that we can handle. We can produce content with pictures and sound. Touch, smell, and taste, don't know how to do that in any practical way. So I'm saying we have partial cognition or some dissonance. Dissonance meaning that to the person, and it's not quite right, there's something wrong. And you, the person, have to make up for yourself what's going on. Now, on the other hand, if we just had, as I show on the right, audio only, which is typically the way we often think about binaural, we have even more dissonance. In other words, if you are listening that way, your brain is getting one stimulus and not others that go with it, and you have to figure out what's going on. And that's an individual thing, and that varies according to the music and how you feel and things like that. So that has made me a strong advocate of sight and sound together. Technically very easy to do today. And you all carry some type of personal audio-video device. You can have these two essentially for nothing. Now I like to talk about a production meme. It's always kind of cool to think about what we're trying to do, what might be nice, etc. So most of the music that we sort of get trained on and develop a love for, and this is real music and so forth, usually come from some kind of a concert hall. So here we have Lonely You down at the bottom, if you see that little head, and this string quartet. And to your knowledge, this is it. This is wonderful. The concert hall has great acoustics, and you're sitting there. But you might wonder, you know, well, I really have this nice home, beautiful acoustics, nice looking room. Wouldn't it be nice if I could get these guys to come and sit in my room? Wow, that would be pretty cool. And then I would join them, and now I've got something that probably would be better. How do I do that? Well, my sort of personal mission has been to try to create this result so that you could have the feeling that you're in a personal listening space and your favorite musicians are playing for you. And really it would be better than the concert hall, because in the concert hall you're more distant, people are talking, the imaging is really pretty narrow. You know, there's not much in development other than from the hall. So that's my meme. All right, so now let's look at some of the production advantages of producing in binaural. Let's talk about the binaural timbral advantage. Okay, so I'm going to read this slowly. The timbral aspects of sound that we capture by the left and right ears of the recording system are essentially the same as if you had been in the space, and that's what you would have heard. That's cool, okay? Now, in contrast, applying that logic to an array of microphones trying to pick up this group, you know, spot mics and things like that, they contain errors. And so it becomes a construct of creativity to make it sound great, but it's not like the real thing. All right, that's the timbral advantage. Okay, now let's look at the spatial advantage. So unlike conventional microphones used for recording sound, where you track it or you put microphones by the instruments to get the results you want, a binaural recording captures both the direct sound and all the indirect sounds that each ear would have heard if you had been there. The key is it better be good when you're there listening to it, but you have that advantage. So I call that the binaural spatial advantage. If you're interested, I created and presented a paper in 2014 called The Design, Calibration, Validation of a Binaural Recording and Playback System for Headphone and Two-Speaker 3D Audio Reproduction. This contains more background of what I'm talking about. So if you are familiar with the AES e-library, which you can subscribe to, or you can buy papers individually, you can have this if you want it. And this will give you some further background. Some key elements of the production process. Okay, this is where it gets a little scientific, but if I explain it clearly and we communicate here, I think it will become pretty clear what we're talking about. On the upper left here, we have a cross-section of a human head where we have the outer ear portion here, the pinna and the ear canal, the tympanic membrane, the siccular chain, which changes this pressure to a mechanical motion. It drives the cochlea through the oval window, etc. And what comes out the other end is impulses that go into the brain stem, and we interpret that as sound. All right, now here's a very important observation that has been made several times. I know I had to convince myself that this was true. It says that if I block the ear canal with a little gray object here, and I sense the pressure at this point, I'm going to call that P2, and then I make a sound that's fixed in time and space, and I measure P2, and I keep the sound source just where it is, and then I remove this, and I put a microphone at the eardrum, I'll get a different sound, obviously. And that sound would vary depending on where it was around your head, because your head's an acoustic obstacle and so forth. But here's the cool thing. If you plot the ratio of these two, P4 over P2, the cool thing is it's essentially a constant. So that gives you a big hint that says, hey, if I decide to record at the entrance to the ear canal, I'm taking in all of the effects of our anatomy. I'm getting a signal that relates to what would happen at the eardrum. And I can measure that for a person or in a calibrated system. So let's talk about how the head influences that pressure P2. This is a very familiar graph. On the upper right, there is a combination graph. It looks rather complicated, but here's what it is. Here's a person sitting and listening to a sound at a particular angle. The total sound pressure level at that angle is shown by the upper curve. That is a result of sound pressure modification by your torso, your head, the pinna, the ear canal, etc., and you end up with this total. which is another way of saying that if you're going to record binaurally with either a mannequin or a dummy head, it's to your advantage to mimic all of those features, the anatomy, so to speak. So this is what I was talking about, and if you read the fine print, you can see what all these contributors are. It's a case for saying, if you're going to make a binaural recording, use either a suitable dummy head or a real person. Okay, now there's a little more to it than that. People talk about, well, that's me and this is you, and there's no head tracking and things like that. We can talk about that, but this gets you 90% of the way there. Okay, so this is the same thing in a somewhat different diagrammatically way. So we start up here, we have an acoustic scene. Okay, acoustic scene. This is music or whatever you want, and we've got a recording head here that has microphones at each occluded ear canal entrance, and that gives us a pressure left and a pressure right. We call it a binaural pressure. Okay, now these two signals go to a block I've called timbral compensation for recording system and reference headphones. So what you find if you're a producer of content and you're going to be recording, you have to make some assumptions about the headphones that your customer is going to have. It's just, since it's not standardized, you have to take a chance and hope you're right. So the combination of the microphones where they are and the headphones where they are give you some transfer functions so that you can do a tonal balance compensation so it sounds right for your reference earphones. So when that's all done, we've got two voltages, a headphone master left and a headphone master right, such that when you play this over your reference headphones, you establish the two pressures that you had there. Okay, does that make pretty good sense? All right, now, I told you earlier that dealing with this headphone and loudspeaker issue, there is a solution so that you could produce a single binaural production and then do something to it to give you a loudspeaker production without having to remix, so to speak. And we can get an idea of that here. So, okay, we start where we were before. We move this box up on top. So here we have these two reference signals, this one, that one, this one, that one. Now, we introduce a concept that is familiar to a number of you, but not all of you, called crosstalk cancellation. So here's the basic idea. If I simply played the binaural recording over two loudspeakers, the left speaker would talk not only to the left ear, but the right ear and vice versa. So that concept brings in crosstalk. You don't want it because when you're listening with the headphones, there's no crosstalk. So this is a mathematical manipulation. People have been doing this one way or another since the 60s. The tools obviously have improved. You can do this digitally these days. And we've developed, my group, a crosstalk cancellation filter that we're pretty happy with. Now, the way we got happy with it is we said, okay, let's pick some reference speakers that we're going to use. Let's make some recordings, listen this way, and then listen that way. How do they balance tonally and spatially? And it's somewhat of an iterative process. There's only so much you can do calculating to be perfect, which you never are, and then you go back and you, as they say, salt and pepper it to make it work right. So the summary point here is that if you're in the business of producing binaural audio, you can also be in the business of producing a product for loudspeaker listening that's just manipulated by a filter. So you could release it with two separate files, or you could have a box that will do it on demand. Okay, so now let's add one more thing. We're going to put a picture in this thing to complete the synergy observation, and sync that all up. So you watch the same picture both times. Again, it's a compromise. The point of view of the picture and the point of view of the audio are not always going to be the same. It's a little like watching a concert or music video on television where the audio perspective is fixed, but about every 5 seconds you switch to a different view. So it's somewhat of a norm, and this is something that we're trying to determine what works well and what doesn't. But so far, most of our productions are all single point of view camera. We pan, we zoom, and so forth. And as you see these examples, you'll see that. Okay. So let's look at some production tools. I've done things where we use a person. Matter of fact, in Rome a few years ago, I wasn't able to bring my mannequin for obvious reasons, and I used a friend of mine, and we recorded a jazz concert. Some of you might have heard about it or seen it. It is on YouTube, and so we used a real person. So that person was pretty much told, look ahead and don't scratch your face or mess your hair or things like that. Then we've selected a set of earphones that we consider to be reference or a reference response. It's not a particular model you go out and buy, but it's something that we've constructed that we think is typical. Okay, I think these earphones that you have right now are pretty typical. Okay, and then we've picked a loudspeaker for monitoring, and I'm not going to get into the fine points of that, but we have found that the radiation properties of the speaker influence how well the crosstalk works. And I won't go into much more depth, but I can say from experience that any KEF speaker with the UniQ driver, which is a coincidental woofer tweeter, works quite well. And the real key is that if you look at the listening space you're going to be at, that speaker can flood that space with very uniform sound at all frequencies, because we're relying on some things called head-related transfer functions in our crosstalk canceller. So that's an observation that we've made. Okay. As I've been doing this for a while, this is lessons learned, which I think is very important. If you're going to do a binaural recording, here's some things to consider. One is the recording had distance to the musicians. So what's this going to do for you? If you're far off, like the fellow that was in the concert hall, and you made a binaural recording, it's not going to have much leftness and rightness to it, because everything is quite a ways away, and it may have more hall sound than you would normally want. So by moving the head closer to the musicians, you can control an ambience balance to the musicians' spread, etc. And the tendency of many people during binaural recording is not to get close enough to the talent. Okay, and then the musician's relationship to the recording head. Where are they? Center, left, right, sides, back, so forth. These are all things you have control over and make a difference. So you kind of want to be able to monitor and test as you go. Thirdly, the musicians have to be able to create an ensemble of balance for themselves. Where I found this particularly challenging is if I have a singer and a trumpet player. Okay? Now, most people when they play music have difficulty playing very softly. So in situations like that, what I found necessary is you augment weak sounds with some sort of sound reinforcement. You've probably seen some of these speaker systems that Bose and others developed, which are line arrays, bass at the bottom, and you can get a pretty narrow, concentrated sound field for a single instrument or something like that. So augmenting low level, particularly vocals, with a local sound reinforcement system unless that person is an opera singer or something like that, you're going to wear them out. They're not going to be able to sing well and so forth. Most other instruments aren't too much in the way of trouble. Most guitars can be amplified. And percussionists tend to be kind of balanced, loud with other instruments. So it's mostly been a vocalist that's been a problem trying to do this sort of thing. Then there's the recording space. You want it to sound good. That's your space. You're not adding that artificially like you might do in a studio type situation where maybe you're just trying to get a dry sound from each mic, and then you're going to add some kind of space to that. Here, you introduce yourself to, I want the space to be what I want. So you're starting to see it's sort of backwards from normal recording. You get it all right to start with, then you push the button and hope that they play the tunes well. And then, this is my own personal preference, spatially interesting musical arrangements. Every type of music has what I call its boring style, monotonous. It's none of my business how you write your music, but to me, things that go over and over and over and over and don't change much, don't do much for me. So I like a melody, a rhythm, and not everybody playing at the same time. If everybody plays at the same time, it is difficult to pick one thing out from the other. So I like things that pop, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and so forth. It's about the music, which has really been driving me here. So that's between you and the musicians to try to get something that's cool. Okay. Now we're going to get into some production demonstrations. This is a collection of some pictures that we've taken in a few places while we were working with musicians. I'll draw your attention to the lower left here. This is a fellow in our group that has a very good sense of ensemble of balance. He plays numerous instruments and so forth. Here's a group, you can't see them all, that we were setting up, and we were trying to find a position for a mannequin. So he would put his head down close and make subjective observations about balance, where things were coming from and so forth. You need an artistic, with it person to be part of this. I try to do it all, but I can't. You can't produce things just all by yourself. These are just some glamour shots of some people. This is our mannequin. We call him Dexter. And if anybody saw the television sequence Dexter, it was a series that was on probably worldwide now. Dexter was a serial killer that used to chop up the bodies of his victims. And Dexter comes apart. I can take his head off and his shoulders and his rear end and his legs and so forth. So I call him Dexter. And he can be put together in different ways. Here he's put together as a torso, head and torso cut off at the waist. Another thing you want to do when you're producing is have an ability to have the musician stop and listen and watch. So typically we'd set up a projection television, have a headphone system, and here's an example of some musicians taking a break in their production and listening, and then we have back and forth between the production people and them about level changes and so forth to try to get your mix correct, so to speak. Here's another view of everything going on, but that's just to give you a little sense of that. Okay, so now it's time to listen to some things. This is a older demo that I've done before, but this accomplishes a few things. It'll help with the sight and sound synergy. It deals with horizontal plane localization, but there's an airplane flying over. So you definitely will get a height indication of what's going on. So this is me talking in my backyard. There's Dexter, and I'm going to start talking in the middle, and we'll do this. If for some reason we have trouble, we can back it up and start again. So here we go. I'm going to slowly walk around the mannequin, and you can see where I am, but I'll also point out the position. So we're on axis, and we're going to move toward the left ear. 7777, 7777. She sells seashells by the seashore. 7777, 7777. She sells seashells by the seashore. 7777. She sells seashells by the seashore. Now I'm directly on the left ear, moving toward the back. 7777. She sells seashells by the seashore. 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 Now I'm directly behind. Now this has generally worked for everybody I've played this for, that the apparent position of my voice and the picture agree with each other. Most everybody have that impression? Okay. This tells you a little bit about synergy of sight and sound. Dexter's got his own HRTFs and geometry, and comes pretty close to all of us here, and it helps when you have the image to reinforce things. Okay. Now I've got another version of the sight, and did everybody hear the airplane on up high? See, there's an example of, you know what an airplane sounds like. You know they're usually up above you, so your brain finds that a fairly easy puzzle to put together. Okay. Okay, now we're going to try something a little different. There's an ensemble of some Dixieland music players that are going to play a bit here, sound only, so you won't hear or see any of what's going on. Let me just get my earphones on here. So we'll start that. We'll play a little bit. Hopefully you'll like the music. Okay, here we go. Okay, that's the end of the clip. Now, you're going to see them, same audio, but this time with moving picture. So here we go again. Okay, so this makes it easier to put the picture together. It's the same sound, but when you add some images with it, I believe it always makes it more enjoyable. But doesn't mean you have to look at the picture. A lot of audio folks, you close your eyes because you're used to that, because you don't want the cognitive dissonance of this room that doesn't relate to it at all interfering with you. But now there's sometimes a tendency to close your eyes when the picture's on. So I say, don't close your eyes. Look at the picture for what it's worth. Okay. Now, I organized the same group to play another song where I felt that the individual playing, in Dixieland, everybody doesn't play at the same time, where you get a pretty good spatial feeling for a little here, a little there, and so forth. So it's different song, same group. We start with the picture. Okay, so you get an idea of how it can become a little more interesting if you have things from different positions, not all playing at the same time. And there's been a lot of binaural demos I've heard where it's a mishmash. Everything's playing at once, and compared to a stereo mixdown, you couldn't sell me one over the other. So this is part of the production skill. Anybody can have the tools, but you have to learn some things about pleasing your audience. Another thing I've done that is kind of helpful to get people in the mood of listening to a particular recording that's coming up is I've done a little animated logo in which I have a head and this little circle that goes around the head. Now that was actually a recording I made myself where I had microphones in my ears, I had a source playing, and as it played, I went around. So relatively speaking, the speaker went around my head. This is just kind of cute and an example of something you can do to get people ready for the experience. So here we go. This tells your listener that it's a binaural thing. Okay, so now I want to talk about another thing. You know, where a lot of recording folks are focused on a nice stereo spread, you know, sort of a planar thing in front of you. And I just want to show you how with, I won't start this yet, if we take our musicians and we put them in a line in front of the mannequin, you get a very nice spread of where everything is. So it's the same kinds of music, but with a different approach to the spatial side. So this is more frontal, but it'll make that point. So here we go. Okay, so again, uniform spread, same mic technique, we just rearrange the musicians. I like to talk about the real sound of instruments. This is kind of an interesting case. Any recording engineer will tell you his favorite way to record a guitar or piano or things like this, which to me are all based on, I've heard the live instrument, I'm trying to mimic it in some way with a mic or a limited number of microphones to get the result. Okay, here's an example of probably being about 4 feet. This is a church environment, quiet. A friend of mine plays acoustic guitar quite well. So this is what I call real sound of an instrument. This is a acoustical guitar. And we're off. This sort of brings up an interesting question about musical instruments. I'm not a designer of guitars, but it seems to me that someone that does and people that are good guitarists, there's sort of 2 points of view. How does it sound to me listening to it, and how does it sound to the guitar player, which is more of the personal thing. But I think you would agree that there's a pretty natural sounding recording of an instrument, which, all the microphones are roughly 4 feet away. It's a binaural recording. Okay, if any of you have been following organ concerts at AES for over the last 20 years, you maybe heard of Graham Bly. He's from the UK, and he's been giving organ concerts at each convention in a local cathedral, church, and so forth. This is one that I recorded in New York 4 years ago or so, and the person that was, there wasn't a mannequin, it was one of my partners sitting down in the sanctuary with his back to the organ. Okay, so that's the perspective. Organ pipes are behind the listener. So when we start, we'll see the video switches between the organist, who's way behind up in a loft, and a few shots of the church to make it interesting. So here we go, and some of you might recognize Francis Rumsey. He was his page turner. Francis and Graham are both playing or have played an organ concert. Is that tonight? That's tonight, and you can find that in the program. So here we go. Okay. Okay, we've got a few more left here. I haven't been watching my time, but I haven't exceeded my hour yet, so I think we can finish this and maybe have some time for questions. Here's a string quartet playing in what I'd call a semi-reverberant church. I'm probably 10 feet away from the ensemble, and here we go. You'll probably recognize the music. You can see the mannequin's head with the wig on it right in the lower right, I should say. Okay, different style. People that have been doing recordings of things like this often tend to do close miking, and to many of them this will sound a little bit too wet, but I like it. That's the whole idea here. Our group has started to try to produce some things that we can actually sell. We've been at this for quite a few years, and this is an example of a jazz recording that was recorded at one of the regional audio shows in the United States. There's a number of them. There's things in Europe that are also like this, but this was called AXPHONA. It was an acronym for Audio Exposition North America. This was in April of 2015. So this is an excerpt from that. And you can see the instruments here, and then you can also see where our mannequin was for this. All right. Now for a quick summary. So we've talked about immersive productions being created for headphones that may really be enjoyed by the world's largest group of listeners, headphone listeners. Don't have to worry about other customers that could enjoy it. They come in all shapes and colors and sizes and forms, and there's a fairly good size, higher end headphone market now as well. For loudspeaker listening, for those that have a serious interest and don't mind sitting in one spot between two speakers, you can use crosstalk cancellation to produce a very good rendition of this. We're able to reliably produce signals all the way out to plus or minus 90 degrees quite reliably. Some people can get it all the way around and so forth. So that's the main message. Let me just leave this up. We have a very good, complete website. If you can remember a funny spelling of the word immersive, spelled with an AV at the end, meaning to be immersed in an audio-visual experience. If you go to that website, you can pretty much learn all about all the stuff we've been doing. And many of the things that I've showed you are on that website. And if you know how to download from YouTube, you can have your own 1080p copy, for example. We also have a YouTube channel, and we're active on Facebook. So with that, I will thank you all, and I think we maybe have some time for questions. We're just about out of time, but I don't know, is there another meeting right away in this room? I don't know. So we'll wrap this up with some questions, and thank you all for coming on this early Monday morning when most of you would probably rather be sleeping. So thank you. I think if you just speak up, we do have, we're all set here. We have a microphone, so go ahead, sir.
Hi, I apologize, I missed the very beginning, so I'm not sure if you covered this.
Yes, sir.
But I'm interested to know how you determine the size of the head that you used, because I found things kind of over-lateralized as opposed to what was in the image.
Okay.
And also how you chose the height when you do the recording, because at least for the Dixie band,
Yeah.
Everything seemed a little too high for me.
Okay.
And then on the same, just on the third, I saw that sometimes you used a wig and sometimes you didn't. So I'm also interested how you make those choices.
Let me try to answer them in order. The wig is for show. I've never been able to find any value to that. Sometimes you want the mannequin to blend in better. Issues dealing with height and lateralization I found to be somewhat an issue of the picture you see and the actual image you hear. And all I can say is it varies. I know some people are particularly sensitive to, hey, it seemed much wider than it looked, for example. So that is how do I satisfy a customer, what they might want. The height thing is generally it's been try to put it at the height that I would have been at while I was listening, either standing or seating. There is some, I don't know the exact reason for it, but sometimes with binaural recordings, there is a tendency with your cognitive behavior to make the sound go up. It just seems that way. But I found that to be an individual thing. I was doing one particular comparison where this was not something I showed. I have a recording where I'm walking around the mannequin in a semi-reverberant space at me matching the height of the mannequin. Many people are insensitive to height changes. They'll say, oh, it sounds just fine. Some people will say, well, it went up or down. And some will say it went in or out. These perhaps are differences between the anatomy of the mannequin and the anatomy of the person. To your first question, how did I pick the mannequin and so forth, there's a little history to this. If you're familiar with Knowles Electronics in Keymar, which is now sold by Grass, I worked a lot with the Keymar in one of the jobs I had. When I was looking for a mannequin, I stumbled on this store mannequin that I bought from a display house, and just having been around Keymar for a while, I said, this is close enough to Keymar to suit me. So then what I did is I operated on him and I took his ears off because he had these little, essence of ears. And then I bought some Brulin Care artificial pinnas that are made out of silicone, and they're mountable there. So your point's well taken, and this is a compromise aspect of this. See, my feeling has been if I have to deal with temporal issues due to different headphones, if I have to deal with what you might do with head tracking and what you might do with different people, I don't have a product. It's too, if you want to get it right down to the last gnat's eyebrow of being perfect, you're never going to get anywhere. You can do it for yourself, or if you want to invest in doing your own personal binaural recordings, you'll do even better. So I hope I answered all your questions. I tried to get them in reverse order that you asked them. Is that pretty much cover it for you?
They were answers.
Okay, they were answers. Okay, well, we can talk after. They're my answers, so I'm entitled to my answers. They might not satisfy your questions. We got to talk some more. So is there anybody else? Yes, sir, this gentleman here in the maroon.
First of all, thanks for your presentation and all the work you've done. It's contributed, I'm sure, to the whole effort in binaural. In my work with thinking about binaural and working with binaural, one thing that I wondered about a year ago, and it could be absolutely irrelevant or there could be something to it, and that is that, regarding the frontal localization problem that we have in binaural, I wondered if the nasal and sinus cavity that we have in the front of our head, which is actually connected to the inner ear, if there isn't some resonance that happens there. I know there's other explanations for this frontal reversal going up or back, but I wonder if it hasn't been any testing regarding creating mannequin heads with resonant cavities in the front that are connected somehow to the...
Let me give you an anecdotal answer. This is one thing that's bothered me for some time. Quite often with any headphone listening, there's a variable difference to out of head, your perception of distance. Okay, when you're listening with headphones, you only have one stimulus, the ears. So if what you're saying is a factor, you don't get it doing that. But when I've done the crosstalk cancellation, where this could be going on, we never have a problem with externalization. So that's an open question that I would like to be able to do better with headphones. So we might need one that goes over here. I don't know, I'm just funning. But there's, in other words, it's not perfect, but it gets you like 90% there. And if you like the music, you don't care anyway. It's just great. So that's I keep reminding myself of it. It's the music, Bob, and the technology comes along. People aren't going to go out and buy this just because it's binaural, unless they're, kind of geeky and so forth, like I hope most of you folks are, and makes it more interesting. Do we have any other questions? This gentleman in the hat here? Yes, sir.
The crosstalk filter, in what form does that take place, like practically speaking? Like if I were to make my own binaural recordings and I wanted to make sure they transferred to loudspeakers.
Our crosstalk canceller is a 2-in, 2-out. So you take your binaural recording, you feed it into the crosstalk canceller, it gives you two outputs that are the crosstalk canceled version. And then you just feed that to the speaker system. So it's a signal processing solution. Am I making myself clear? Yeah. Right. Okay. We have another question here. Like questions. This is good. Thanks, folks, for being alert. Go ahead, sir.
I was wondering, when you built the dummy head yourself, basically, did you play around how much pinna, for example, you need? So did you try like a easier version, self-made version, maybe before you bought the B&K?
Well, when I started, I had some pretty crazy-looking binaural heads. I had a blow-up dummy for a body at one time. I had a styrofoam head that had essence of ears. But as I dug into this, I said I need something a little more substantial. The folks at Brule & Care, or Grass, if you're familiar with them, they make test equipment, and KEMAR, which was developed in the mid-'70s. I think it was based on people in the astronaut program where they had the ability to make a lot of measurements. So there's been, over time, different size ears. I'm using, I think, the larger silicone ear from Brule & Care, and they make a set that they're different, slightly different, and now they've come out with some where they're completely accurate mirror images of each other. I've yet to do work where the fineness of this has been much of an issue. I looked at the KEMAR dimensions that are published, and I found that I was close enough for government work, as they say, or close enough for farm work with the mannequin I had, and it was much more affordable than $3,000 or $4,000. So, and I've sort of bonded with my mannequin. So anyway, is that helping you out with your question? Okay, thank you. We're out of time. Well, I'll take one more. I don't know, is there another group? It's in here right away? Okay, let's just make this the last question. Thank you.
Did you filter these recordings we heard now with the inverse RUG in terms of audiology, with real ear unaided gain? So you showed at the first the curve the inner ear is doing,
Yes.
is adding. Did you filter it out in these recordings we heard?
No, I didn't filter it out. It's basically the outputs from they're flat microphones that I use with about a 19 dBA noise level. And most of the EQ is in the earphones that you pick, because most quality earphones have their own bump. So there's a little tweaking I can do based on what I think is a more typical earphone. I generally have agreed with the findings of Sean Olive and the Harman Group from their subjective preference. I drew my conclusions long before that, but it's always nice to see somebody that sort of agrees with you. Okay? Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and I'll have to clear the room here.